This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello, this is Breege Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally. Politi, John H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Jeffrey B., Gabby, Helen M., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, DS, Jake B., CDV, Ali, V!, Mary Beth R., Ida B., Eric N., Tana, May, and Gold_81. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there's so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversation on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm Breege Burke, and we are at the last podcast of 2024, which is going to be on a figure called La Befana. Now, I haven't covered La Befana in the past, even though I have covered similar Christmas-related figures like Frau Perkta and Grilla, again, two episodes that need remastering to be put back up, which is why if you go to look for them now, you won't find them right away, at least not if you're listening to this within the week that this comes out. But La Befana always came across as a more of a kindly, grandmotherly kind of figure, so I didn't entirely count her within the dark feminine, but then people said to me, no, take another look at her, because she's not, that's more of a modern iteration of what she is, and that the history behind her is a little bit more interesting. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, people who don't follow this podcast regularly, just to let you know the way that I typically do this, and the way I'm going to do this one, is I like to go through, I don't write like an academic paper on the topic. If I've written academic papers on the topic, then I can typically quote them. But in this particular case, I'm going to find what I find are the most reasonable sources of basic good information that have sources cited that I can point to and say, okay, this seems like this is good information. Some figures have more available than others without doing intensive research. And being that I do podcasts every 2 weeks, there's only so much intensive research I'm going to do, but I'm going to do, certainly due diligence in trying to find what I consider to be the most reliable information and not just, somebody's devotional or opinion or something like that. So I've got two sources here. Let's see if I can say this one correctly. Radiki Silicane, I think is how this is said, or Silicane, because I think the term Sicilian is somewhere in here. Radike Silicane, yeah, I think that's what this is, how you pronounce this. Again, I do know Latin, and I have read Old Italian, but I am not necessarily I'm certainly not a speaker of that language, so apologies if I say anything incorrectly. And also, the Wikipedia article seems very, very complete, and it does have a lot of sources. Although there occasionally are places where they'll mention a scholar mentioning something, and I'm like, okay, where is this from? It's not in the bibliography. So anyway, these are the sources that I'm going to be using today. And what I do is I want to go over, I go through usually these sources, talk about the history, what is known about the figure, how they're described, what they're supposed to look like, and what their attributes are. And then we start taking the attributes apart and looking at them bit by bit to say, okay, what is the... what can we say archetypally about these figures? I'm not looking at these figures from the point of view of a worshiper or even a folklorist in the traditional sense, more in the sense of somebody who studies the psychology of myth. So that is going to be the perspective that I tend to take on these figures, and particularly when it comes to ideas about the feminine with a capital F. Okay, so the archetypal feminine, not just our perceptions of women, although that might come into play, depending on how that seems to be translated into the culture or the society. But this is what we are looking at in particular. So with Befana, now she is definitely a Christmas-type figure, or she's associated with the 12 days of Christmas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of switch back and forth between the two articles that I've mentioned. And I'm going to read a little bit from it so that we can get a sense of La Befana's background, what the traditions are surrounding her, what she's supposed to do, what she has to do with Christmas. And then we will get into all of the associations that have been discussed in the scholarship, any potential origins that we're looking at. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I do have one other source. Phyllis Sifker's Santa Claus, Last of the Wild Men has a reference to La Befana in here as well, because as you will see, she bears a lot of similarity to Santa Claus. So, okay, so let's just read from this article. We'll start here, and we'll work our way through our thoughts and association, because I like to do this as I go. Okay, so in Italian folklore and folk customs, the Befana is a witch-like old woman who delivers gifts to children throughout Italy on Epiphany Eve, the night of January the 5th, in a similar way to Santa Claus or the Three Magi. Now, this is from Wikipedia, by the way. The Befana is a widespread tradition among Italians and thus has many names. She is part of both popular national culture and traditional folk culture, and is akin to other figures who roam about sometime during the 12 days and reward the good, punish the bad, and receive offerings. The Befana is a mysterious, contradictory figure of unclear origins. The character is enhanced by the fact that she is overall neglected by scholars, but is the subject of much speculation by the ones who do mention her. Pre-Christian, Christian, and syncretism of the two have all been postulated as explanations of her origins. In some parts of Italy, especially the central regions, mumming takes place on Epiphany Eve. And this is where you will have the mummers, or these actors, traveling actors, who will go from house to house and do these kinds of little plays or kinds of skits in exchange for food. And this happens. This doesn't only happen in Italy. We hear about this happening in other places in Europe. We see, in Wales and in different places. This kind of tradition does go on. In England too, there are different versions of this practice connected with. Certainly with Christmas, connected with certain things like nativity plays and things like that are probably to some degree an outgrowth of some of that, though these traditions in their own right tend to go on not only at the Christmas time, but we also see these in the spring as well. So this particular mumming takes place on Epiphany Eve. Dolls are made of her and effigies are burnt and bonfires are often lit. She brings gifts to good children, typically sweets, candies, or toys, but coal to bad children. Now, this sounds very much like the American Santa Claus, right? She is usually portrayed as a hag riding a broomstick through the air wearing a black shawl and is covered in soot because she enters children's houses through the chimney. Now, that's interesting because we think of Santa Claus as riding on a sleigh drawn by reindeer, coming from the north or the North Pole. And so he seems to be a mashup figure of St. Nicholas and figures like these European gift givers, including La Befana, in his own way. But interesting, we do have this idea of a woman who rides through the air, bringing toys on Christmas, being kind of the point here, and entering through the chimney. She is often smiling and carries a bag or hamper filled with candy, gifts, or both. Okay, and they said there's a citation needed for that. She is not only loved, but feared and mocked, particularly by children. Now, that's interesting, and we'll get into that piece of it. Okay, so the etymology of her name. It's that a popular belief is that her name derives from the Feast of Epiphany itself. Many people believe that the name Befana is derived from the Italian version of the Greek word Epiphania or Epiphania, which means appearance or surface. But in English, and so the Epiphany, okay, when we think about that as a holiday, I don't want to assume that everybody knows what Epiphany is as a holiday. I would tend to make the assumption of like, oh yeah, of course you know Epiphany, right? But Epiphany is supposed to be when you have the appearance, hence the appearance, of the three wise men or the three Magoi or Magi who would come to where Mary and Joseph are there with the infant Jesus. And so this is the Epiphany. This is the first seeing of the divine child. Okay, this is the first place that one sees the divine child. Now, it's also worth noting that the day of Epiphany is also the feast of Kore, who is who becomes the spouse of Hades. She becomes Proserpina or Persephone, but she is, Kore means girl, and she is almost like this presentation of the young girl in that case, who then ends up becoming this very mysterious underworld queen who's also associated with the coming of spring in connection with her mother. So, yeah, so we definitely have this, this kind of idea of the Epiphany has to do with the appearance that is made. So when these three magoi or magi, who are magi, by the way, we always think of them as astrologers. They're Zoroastrians, really, and they belong to the Persian religion, which later made its way into Greece and to other places. I talk about this in my book. Some of the ways in which that has influenced, well, the way in Zoroastrianism has influenced kind of our modern conceptions of religion. But it's interesting because they have made their way into the nativity story, because there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that is said to be the origin of the idea of the Star of Bethlehem, that was seen, like the star in the east that is seen by these so-called Eastern wise men. Eastern, I guess, compared to where Bethlehem is. They're Eastern. But they are coming from Persia, and they have this star, and the implication is that this star leads them to this place. But I don't think it's literally, that's only shown as like, yeah, they're literally get on their camels or whatever and follow the star. But I don't know that would have been the case. They probably would have done the astrology and maybe pinpointed a particular location that they thought might have been associated with what the star was representing. But anyway, just wanting to give the context for that kind of a thing. But certainly with the Feast of Three Kings or the Epiphany, there are festivities that are associated with that. And of course, as we remember, the three wise men, or the three magoi, bring gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? So there's this connection of gift giving at the time that is connected to Christmas, or the 12 days of Christmas. Okay, so that's the one version. Now, that's the most popular theory. Now, others posit, however, back to Wikipedia, that the name is a derivative of Bastrina, the gifts associated with the goddess Strina. Okay, in the book Domestic Life in Palestine by Mary E. Rogers from 1865, the author notes, in an essay on the fine arts by E.L. Tarbuck led me to believe this custom is a relic of pagan worship, and that the word Bastrina refers to the offerings which used to be made to the goddess Chthonia. We can hardly expect that pagans who embraced Christianity could altogether abandon former creeds and customs. Or rather, they were assimilated into this. Macaulay says Christianity conquered paganism, but paganism infected Christianity. The rites of the pantheon passed into her worship, and the subtleties of the academy into her creed. Yeah, so people who don't want pagan influence, but Christianity is loaded with it because it's kind of like an archaeological or stratum in the soil. It's another layer that's kind of planted on top of it in a lot of ways. Many pagan customs were adopted by the new church. T. Hope, in his essay on architecture, says the Saturnalia were continued in the carnival, and the festival with offerings to the goddess Chthonia was continued in that of the new year. Okay, so let's look a little bit about Chthonia, or Strena. And this takes me to our other website, radicisilicone.com. And again, I might be saying that wrong. I feel like there's so many I's in there. I'm like, am I hitting all of them? But okay, so this person shares their personal opinions about La Befana and also likes to connect her to Hecate here. When I see Befana, I'm brought to the image of Hecate in a dream I had in my mid-20s and so forth. So they tell her name was Hecate Befana. That's interesting. That's this person, as they said, that's their personal reflection, dream experience, which does not necessarily reflect the history. But they mention this ancient name and figure, Strina. The goddess Strina, also called Strenia or Strenua, is the Sabine Roman goddess of the new year, the goddess of purification, of spiritual, emotional, physical well-being, of new life. Some believe the Befana tradition of bringing gifts is derived by the Strenua cult. In the book Vestiges of Ancient Manners and Customs, discoverable in modern Italy and Sicily, by Reverend John Blunt from 1823, the author says, this Befana appears to be heir at law of a certain heathen goddess called Strenia, who presided over the New Year's gift, Strenae, from which indeed she derived her name. Her presents were of the same description as those of the Befana: figs, dates, and honey. And then, of course, they talk about the Mary E. Rogers quote. So we have, I'll just read the rest of this. La Befana, who is now known as the Christmas Witch, spends her days cleaning and sweeping, keeping her home tidy, and on the eve of Epiphany, she delivers sweets to the kids. Popular and modern tradition says that La Befana does not want to be seen. So if you try to look at her to see her, you'll get a smack from her magical broomstick when you least expect it. And apparently, that's the kinder version. I've heard that worse things can happen to you if you see her. So, in the most common modern tellings of the Italian tale, La Befana's famous midnight ride is done on her very magical broomstick. Sometimes she appears on a donkey, a way of subduing her magic, in my opinion. At least that this person, not mine, but the person writing this, it was their opinion, which is a symbolic element of witchcraft and also as keeper of the homestead, two very traditionally feminine ways of beings. Now, that's going to lead to what my point is later about La Befana as representing what patriarchy might call the feminine problem. So, we'll get there. Judica Isles says, Befana may predate Christianity and may originally be a goddess of ancestral spirits, forests, and the passage of time. Some identify this wandering nocturnal crone with Hecate. Again, so now we're seeing more people, and Judica Isles, of course, is a very reputable source, that she is, also making this Hecate connection. When I read this from the ever-amazing Isles, it says, I was validated in my long-time thoughts about Hecate and Befana. And again, I'm reading from the blog post here. And they are keepers of a changing time, a clearing time, sweeping away of time. A time of crossroads and thresholds, okay? And I think the threshold association is going to be particularly important here. The brooms bring clarity and protect us, and ask us to look at the magic we want to make in the new year. Ask us to get clear and define choices for ourselves, or perhaps trust the choices we allowed to be made for us once we released from our old selves. If she is associated with Chthonia, then the Befana tradition is derived from the Chthonia witch cult, which is very popular in Sicily still. It is said that Chthonia is associated with New Year's Day. She presides over words of encouragement as well as gifts of good scented omens in the forms of branches of verbena. So, of course, now when she starts to talk about the broom, or he or she, I'm not sure who's writing this, the broom is, immediately when they were talking about broom as sweeping away and bringing clarity, I can immediately think about the broom as it's presented in Lenormand, which is an oracle system. We think of tarot a lot of the time, but Lenormand or Lenormand is another set of cards, usually about 37 cards, 36 or 37 cards. The deck I have has an extra 37th card, but Lenormand is there's certain different symbols. So you'll have things like a rider and a house, or a clover, or a scythe, and there's all these different symbols within Lenormand that have a meaning, and one of them is sometimes known as the whip or the broom, and that's immediately what I thought of when I read that passage, because the broom can mean that you are gaining clarity, getting rid of the BS, so to speak, clearing out, making space. But the broom card can also represent, like I said, as the whip, something which is very critical, something which lashes out at you or that can be dangerous as well. It's very interesting to me that these are both considered to be these kinds of broom associations, and that this particular author is mentioning this as well as this kind of connection with La Befana, her riding on a broom. And again, we could of course extend this idea to the idea of the broomstick as used as a symbol of witchcraft in general. But it's interesting. So we've got this idea of Chthonia or Strena, or the cult of Chthonia, who is considered to be. So if we're talking Etruscan and Sabine, we're talking pre-Rome as a city, as an aristocracy, and even as a republic. This is a lot of people just think Etruscan is to say that Etruria was actually Rome, but not necessarily. Not everything from Rome comes from the Etruscans, even though they were geographically there first. Nonetheless, this does seem to be one of those traditions, and it's worth noting that ancient Roman religion, that was not, like, we always think of them as being connected to the Greeks, right? That the names of the Greek gods end up having Roman counterparts. So Zeus is the same as Jupiter, Hermes is the same as Mercury, Aphrodite, Venus, Ares is Mars, so on and so forth. That we have these, this kind of one-to-one correspondence and correlation. But that's not really an accurate representation of what the religion was of that time period. Ancient Roman religion was very, what we now use the term, animistic. It had to do with the flora and the fauna and the rivers and forests and all the nature spirits. And then, of course, the genius loci, the local spirits, and then also the household gods, which are the same idea, did definitely continue on into the Roman Republic and Empire periods. But Greek mythology and Greek associations, because there was no mythology of Roman religion. These were just the local spirits that you had your festivals and that you made your offerings and that you appeased. And they had different, you eventually had different priests and so forth, and maybe priestesses who had certain functions that were discussed. But when we're talking about this ancient religion, and also I should mention ancient Etruscan religion was very much based on omens. There was a whole set of the way in which weather omens were interpreted, for example, or the way one did augury from, looking at the entrails of a bird or whatever. There was augury was something that was very common as part of this, which, again, you see it a lot in ancient religion. But ancient Roman religion did not have a mythology per se. When Greek drama was introduced to the area, the Etruscans actually adopted a lot of the Greek stories to coincide with gods and deities there. And it was said that one of the Roman kings, I think it was Numa Pompilius, was the first one to to carefully select what of the Greek myths they wanted to adopt into Rome. And then later on, of course, when the Sibylline oracles came into being and became a thing around the time of the Empire, that those also gave instructions as to which gods from other cultures should be adopted in the Roman Empire as a place that is meant to represent a large, diverse group of people and not just simply the local Roman beliefs and deities. So we have this Santa Claus Epiphany figure who's also this witch figure. Okay, so we got into our etymology a little bit. Okay, so they said the Befana is known by several other names throughout Italy. Some of them distinct dialectical variants of the standard Italian old woman, vecchia, or witch, strega. They said here, but the figure of the old woman who brings gifts is not only Roman. She is called, for example, the vecchia, old woman in Pavia, the Epiphany in Lario Orientale, the vecchia, old woman, or stria, in Mantua, Padua, Treviso, and Verona, the Pescara, the Little Easter, in Legnago, in Venice, Marantega, or Redodesa, a name that is also found in the Belluno Alps, etc. She is also called the Sibyl, or Sibylla, speaking of Sibylline oracles. And then the Anguana, and they're saying maybe serpent, and then the Donaza, possibly woman. Let's see, Vecchi, Strie, Femente. She is Barbassa. In Piacenza, she is Mara, and she is Dovecchia in Bologna. So, and again, I don't know if I got all those names right, but yeah. So those are the various names that Befana may be known by regionally, okay, referring to the similar kind of figure. Now it says Italian folklorist Giuseppe Pitre calls her Cartavecchia and the Old Woman of Christmas, the latter of which is Sicilian. The mumming custom also goes by different names. So yeah, we don't need to get into that. So there is so more on her origins here. Written records of the Befana date to the Middle Ages. Her origins are the subject of speculation by scholars who have proposed that they lie in paganism, Christianity, or a mix of the two. John B. Smith said, like her High German counterpart, Perchta, she's nothing more than the personification of Epiphany, invented by medieval Christians who had a tendency to personify feast and fast days, while Jacob Grimm found it not credible that two separate cultures would personify a feast day as a supernatural figure. A name in the calendar had caused the invention of a supernatural being, and concluded it was far more likely that Befana and Perchta were pre-Christian in origin and that they blended with the Christian holiday name. It has been pointed out that there was a clear attempt to Christianize the disturbing female character by transforming her into the female personification of the feast. Yeah, because Befana, it said, whatever links she might have to Chthonia or Strena, she's shown as this hag dressed in black, okay, and to also have dangerous qualities. So let me just actually flip over for a minute to this book on Santa Claus, by Phyllis Siefker. I think that's how you spell it, Siefker. I'm just going to read this bit here. It says, the same gift-giving hag is found in Italy as La Befana and in Russia as the babushka. Legend tells us that these aged wanderers are destined to spend eternity trudging from house to house during the 12 days of Christmas. La Befana reputedly refused to go to Bethlehem with the wise men when they passed her door, and the hapless babushka misdirected them. For penance, they are condemned to find the Christ child. As they wander from house to house, peering in the face of each child, they also give gifts. In Grimm's time, La Befana was a terror, a misshapen black fairy dressed in rags, but more recently has become a kindly grandmother. Now, that's very interesting, okay? The misshapen fairy, that's another way that she's often described, so this sort of implies something. And it's very interesting because now when I hear this, her connection, see how they'll do that, like, you're misdirecting the wise men. So this connects them to Epiphany, right? And to this same feast. Like, they almost have to have a similar function to the Magi in terms of gift giving. But it's more because they are cursed and condemned for not, their misdirection, or they're causing confusion, right? For the Magi, or not giving them proper direction, and why they would be in Russia and Italy when they're coming from Persia. And anyway, it's a legend. Let's not read too much into that. But I also think it's interesting because there's a very similar figure, at least now. I don't know if this is more of a figure that's a literary invention, but there's a figure called Melmoth the Wanderer. And she's very similarly associated with the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ, but it's said to have I can't remember now exactly if she didn't. She was one of the ones, I think, who refused to believe that Jesus rose from the tomb, or told people that it wasn't true, something like that, which has also condemned her to wander. And that's just very interesting that we have these female figures who carry these characteristics of either a hag or a grandmother, or just a woman who is maybe a gossipy kind of a woman, who ends up being associated with these traits of misdirection. They are misdirecting those perhaps who have the wisdom, which is almost an implication here that the power of the feminine, what we think of as the power of the earth, is somehow a misdirection. Or that it is something that is going to be a distraction from the true path, or it's going to lead you astray from the true path in a certain way. Now, again, that's pure speculation, but kind of the history around that would be kind of an interesting thing to look at and to get into. So continuing Wikipedia here. Appearance and behavior. In traditional Italian iconography, she's portrayed as having ember eyes, okay? So what does ember mean? Ember means, like, does that mean black eyes, like an ember? Does it mean coal-like? Does it mean like they're fiery? Because when ember, I think of as a burning ember, that's almost like either a red color or I don't know if it's meant reference to the black color, but ember eyes, sharp feline teeth, okay, like a cat, a sharp and cutting tongue, and a sooty face from the chimneys she enters houses through. Well, that's interesting. So she's got a sharp tongue and sharp teeth, which again gets back to the idea of the woman and the sharpness of her speech, right? She's also described as an ugly, toothless old woman. Grimm described her as a misshapen fairy. She is said to wear rags, a headscarf, and carries a broom and a sack or a basket that she keeps her gifts in. Once a year on the night of January 5th, she leaves the mountain caves where she is said to live and flies through the air riding her broom backwards, which is also interesting, to bring toys or candy to good children and coal or cinders to naughty children in all of Italy. In many poorer parts of Italy, in particular rural Sicily, a stick in a stocking was placed instead of coal. Being a good housekeeper, many say she will sweep the floor before she leaves. To some, the sweeping means sweeping away the problems of the year. Children must not watch her as she visits and delivers items, or they are in serious danger, as she does not like to be watched. Another sanitized version says that if she catches someone watching her, she will receive a playful thump on the shoulder. They will receive a playful thump on the shoulder from her broomstick. This aspect of the tradition may be designed to keep children in their beds. In Rome, her house is said to be among the roofs of the Piazza Navona. Grimm said she was a terror to children. Siporin noted that her contradictory character and summed it up thus. Now, this is the important thing. She is grandmotherly but witch-like, the target of endless mockery but deeply beloved. ridiculous and dignified, domestic and yet a wanderer, weak and dependent yet feared and powerful. She is an old woman played by a young man. Fascinating, right? Everything we've talked about in this podcast on liminality and being on the borders. So she represents, in a certain sense, all of the aspects of the feminine, or all the aspects of nature. Okay, this is reminding me a little bit, those who participated in the ISFM, and by the way, if you ever want to hear any of these lectures, they are available on the instituteforfemininemyth.org website. And you can purchase recordings from that particular, from the fall semester. Those are still available. Joanna Madlock gave her lecture on Baba Yaga. And this is where I'm reminded of this, because Baba Yaga, in the folklore that we see in Slavic folklore and myth, Baba Yaga is, depending on how she is approached, she can either be, she can reward you and be kindly, or she can also, you can be in danger and you could be in trouble. One manifestation of this story is often the story of the wicked stepmother who sends the daughter. She has her natural daughter, and then she has the daughter of her new husband, okay, who is usually like a Vasilisa type. And of course, she's always, the stepdaughter is always a very good girl and, obedient and does everything she's supposed to. Whereas the daughter of the wicked stepmother is shiftless and lazy. We can kind of see Cinderella vibes here, right? But what the wicked stepmother does is the father inevitably goes away somewhere. And so now she's left in the hands of the stepmother, right? So the stepmother will send her on a mission, usually to go find Baba Yaga. And it may be for something really weird, like finding strawberries in February or something like that. And so the girl has to go into the forest where she finds Baba Yaga, who has a house that's on chicken legs. And presumably this is because the house can walk away and move about to wherever it wants to be. And in some versions, Baba Yaga is the sister. So this is the auntie of the girl. Or in any case, she just might be, she has some kind of an old woman, whole grandmotherly kind of role. So when the girl arrives, Baba Yaga will set her to all kinds of tasks. And if the girl completes the tasks dutifully, then Baba Yaga rewards her. In this particular story, at the end of it, when the girl is sent back home again, every time she opens her mouth, a gold coin appears. So she now has this gift of being able to produce wealth in this way. And so when the stepmother sees this, she thinks, "Oh, I'm going to get that for my own natural daughter." So she sends her own daughter to Baba Yaga, but when Baba Yaga puts her through the same tests, the girl is lazy and she doesn't want to do anything, and it's kind of like, do it yourself, old lady kind of thing. And, doesn't really, she comes across as shiftless, lazy, and a bit entitled. And so Baba Yaga sends her home, and when she gets sent home, every time she opens her mouth, a frog comes out. So she is not rewarded in the same way. And again, so you have this idea of the old witch figure, when treated with the proper reverence and respect, will bring something good, and otherwise will bring, you will not be rewarded. You'll be given something that's not considered to be beneficial. And and again, we can see similarities here to the Saint Nicholas coming, but then if you're bad, then Krampus will come and beat you and take you away in his sack. I mean, there's not quite that level of it. I do want to see what this other serious danger is. Let me just go down to the note here. Let's see. Okay, the note is in Italian, so I'm trying to see if I can read it. A single figure, not alone a mystery. Yeah, I don't know. It just basically says in gravi pericoli, which to me I think is just grave danger, but they don't say specifically what she does. So, okay. What then do we make of this? So, okay, but going back to Baba Yaga, I feel like she is, if Baba Yaga is, as Joanna had discussed, this personification of nature. When you think about it, nature is something that provides for us, right? We can, we rely on nature for food, We rely on, the food and water and things that we need to survive, things to nurture us. At the same time, nature can also be very destructive. And as we've seen, looking at some of these, the harpies, the storm hags, and all these different kinds of figures, that's just one example, that come in and represent forces of drought and famine, and just the way in which really violent weather can come in and ravage and destroy something, the way we can be destroyed by flood or by fire or by earthquake. Nature can also be something that is extremely dangerous. And so to me, La Befana is another figure that becomes very similar to Baba Yaga in this sense. She is a figure that is connected to the force of nature. Okay, she has to do with the power of nature and the power of the feminine in nature. And there we go back to that description of her as having these kind of two sides to her that we were talking about. That she's grandmotherly but witch-like, mocked but beloved. Okay, now that's interesting that she's mocked because I guess she could maybe have for the way she looks or something. I don't know. But the fact that she is an object of mockery, which, we certain... Well, it was funny. I was thinking about this today and the idea of the way in which women are often judged. They're judged against a certain standard and are expected to maintain a certain type of appearance and maybe either mocked, bullied, or judged or rejected on that basis. There could be an element of that. But at the same time, she's deeply beloved. So if we think about this, yes, if we look at the old woman is not going to be, she's beyond the years where she's an object maybe of love, but she may be deeply beloved as somebody who has certain motherly qualities or certain nurturing kinds of qualities, right? But she's ridiculous and dignified at the same time, which is interesting. A domestic yet a wanderer. Okay, and we get to this idea. Remember, again, Baba Yaga with the house on chicken legs that moves around, right? The idea of a wanderer, not tied to a location particularly, but at the same time is very much tied to location, which, again, it suggests a figure who is very, there's something very magical about such a figure, or something very archetypal about such a figure. Weak and dependent, which I think is interesting, and I don't know why she's perceived as weak and dependent, but also feared and powerful. And an old woman played by a young man. That's interesting. So the mummers apparently would get a young man to play La Befana. And in here, it's almost like all of the opposites are sewn up together in this one hag figure who wears black. And the black is regarded as something that is good luck. Now... It's interesting because I'm thinking about the whole idea of darkness and blackness and the whole idea of void or nothingness. I was just watching something on that this morning. The way that blackness, if we think about yin and yang, yin is often associated with the dark. Okay, it's the feminine. But in that void, and anybody will tell you, practitioners of Thelema will tell you if they follow the book of the law, anybody who follows... really any kind of Eastern philosophy, the idea of void as being a place of possibility. Okay, when in the darkness, where we think of that as being the destruction of something, because now there's nothing, right, or no thing, it's a negative space. But in that space is also the possibility for everything. So the fact that she wears black, it's it's that space in which she potentially could be destructive, or she could be punishing in some way, but she could also be something that gives, or someone that gives. She can represent a force that brings bounty. And so I can't help but to feel like La Befana ends up in Western culture representing a kind of figure that almost embodies the paradox of the feminine, at least in a culture that splits masculine and feminine and puts masculine very firmly in the privileged category. Okay, because that's always that. How do you solve a problem? maybe not Maria so much, but how do you solve this problem? The problem of the feminine is what gives life. If you're taking a biblical perspective, we're expecting, be fruitful and multiply, right? You're supposed to have families and settle down and extend your line in this way, and so on and so forth. And you need women. You need women's fertility. You need that which is associated with that, and also the way we tend to associate the earth that way in order to plant your crops and to grow things that we can have to eat, to sustain ourselves, to have clean water, to have all this stuff that helps us to live. But at the same time, against the backdrop of living is the fact that death occurs. And with death and decay, that which decays becomes the raw material, potentially, for what ends up being reborn, or what ends up becoming born in some other kind of form. We see this in a lot of mythologies of dying and resurrecting vegetation gods. So like the figure of Adonis, for example, in Greek myth, where both Persephone and Aphrodite are in love with this beautiful boy who is born of a child of... he's actually a child of incest. Mira, she's made to fall by Aphrodite to fall in love with her own father, and she secretly ends up in bed with him, and when he finds out, he's going to kill her, but she escapes and she's turned into this myrrh tree, but the child Adonis is born out of that, and he's this really beautiful child. So the two goddesses fight over him, and eventually, kind of like Persephone, he gets a choice as to how much time he wants to spend in the underworld and how much he wants to spend in the above world. Of course, he gets more of a choice than Persephone does, but he prefers to spend most of his time with Aphrodite in the above world, but eventually he's killed on a boar hunt, and he dies, so Aphrodite turns his blood into the Adonis flower. Now, these are the early myths of when the beautiful young man who's the lover of the goddess dies, being turned into something in the landscape, some other kind of beautiful flowering thing, or some kind of vegetation of some kind, which is probably a precursor to the whole idea of death and resurrection, being resurrected in nature some way. But and of course, if we are associating Epiphany with the new year, okay, and the idea of sweeping out the old year, La Befana also stands on the edge between the old and the new year. She's represents the festivities of that, but also the dangers of darkness. So you have kind of both of these elements here. But I feel like overall she is a figure that represents those paradoxes of femininity, and I think that might have been where I was going with this. Because the feminine is something, right, we need it, we consider it nurturing, protective, mothering, creative. But the feminine is also potentially destructive, dangerous. The forces of nature are something we can try to prepare for a lot of things, but we can't conquer those things. We can't, even nowadays, if you think about the violent storms and earthquakes, the best we can do is have these systems that can predict when they're coming and try to notify people so people can get out of the way of it. All you can do is yield to it, right? You can't just be like, I'm going to go in and fight this hurricane. Like, you can't do that. Nature is not a force. We like to think that we have conquered nature. We do a lot. Patriarchy is very much about conquering the feminine. It's something to be cut down and to be fenced in such a way that makes the wildness of femininity orderly. And she represents this paradox of femininity because properly treated, the feminine can bring abundance and can bring gifts. Improperly treated, it can create destruction. And this kind of goes back to the mythologies, like the sovereignty mythologies that I've talked about in Ireland, where when the girl is given her sovereignty, is treated in such a way that that she is allowed to make her own decisions, like with the Dame Ragnell. You have this ugly hag who, when she marries the beautiful, handsome young man, which is her terms, and she's granted those terms, and he grants her sovereignty to make her own choices, she turns into a beautiful woman, and she's beautiful all the time. That's the gift-giving side, right? But when if we look at the similarly the but if she's mistreated or cursed, that's when she turns into this hag figure who has the potential to be dangerous because of the knowledge and wisdom that she possesses of the earth and its workings, the hidden workings of the earth. And again, what's hidden? Hidden, the Latin word for what's hidden has to do with the word occult comes from that. That which is, and the word occult actually is very similar to ocular, the idea of that which can be seen, right? So what's occult is what cannot be seen, and these are the keepers of those secrets. That would also connect her to Hecate, and they also say Carlo Ginzburg connects her to Nick Nevin as well. And I'm like, well, but they never say where he says this, because I'm like, I have several of Ginzburg's work. I want to find where he says this, and I literally saw it quoted in both places, Ginzburg quoted, and no reference to where that's being quoted from. But these figures, and again, similar to the Kyloch that we see in Irish myth as well, the Hag of Winter. Okay, but the Hag of Winter is also the one, in spite of her appearance, is to be respected because she's also the one that brings the abundance. So there's almost this understanding of this complicated nature of the feminine. She's not good or evil. She's just there. And if you treat her properly, she will reward you. Okay? And they tie this, of course, like with Santa Claus, to moral behavior. If you're a good child, you'll get lots of presents. And if you're not, you're going to get a lump of coal or worse. So it's become something that's didactic. It's been tied to morals. And it's interesting that the way that this has developed in the folklore is that La Befana has become a figure associated with abundance, really, or with gift-giving. Perhaps like if she is connected to the Sabine or Etruscan goddess, then this may be a carryover of that. But at the same time, within this Christianized force, like we see with a lot of ancient deities who end up having an identity change over time, Hecate being one, the Furies being another, where they may have started out as actually quite beautiful women who had very high status in religiously. Then they become these scary figures that are associated with the underworld and death. Well, La Befana, she's kind of retaining that liminality there, because she's kind of both. She has all the qualities. She can be grandmotherly and she can be witch-like. Right? She's dependent, or said to be dependent, but fearful. There's the Christian legend that makes her a wanderer because she's disobedient to the Christ current, right? I mean, there's the idea of nature as something, as this feminine force that's disobedient to, really, that's code for the patriarchy or the religion of empire, but she is disobedient and therefore is condemned as a wanderer, as a nomad, as one who has no home. But yet her home is everywhere because she is everywhere. And so in that sense, she almost becomes a representation of the alienation of Earth and what we associate with Earth, Gaia, the Earth as a goddess, basically, from this newer form of institutionalized and patriarchal religion. And now, again, that will cause some people to speculate, and some people said that Ginzburg was the one who speculated this. But again, I haven't read a source for this, connecting her with a Neolithic goddess. I'm like, yeah, but that's getting into the whole idea that there was an ancient matriarchy, which, again, there may have been or there may not have been. But if there was an ancient matriarchy, it would have definitely incorporated all of these understandings of the feminine, both the beneficent ones and the ones that we find more terrifying and try to appease. And that's why I think she's kind of an interesting figure, how she's turned into this Santa Claus-like figure who is there to bestow gifts. But at the same time, it's almost like she's this misshapen woman who can also be made fun of. So it's like, we're going to pick on and make fun of you, but we also we respect you, So I don't know. I find the paradox there very, very interesting. I mean, when I try to compare her to figures like, say, the three magi or like Santa Claus, I don't see that we make fun of those figures per se. I mean, not in the same way. I mean, it could be that she's a comical looking figure in the way that she's portrayed. I don't know. It's very interesting. Interesting also that they have effigies and dolls of her, and that sometimes these are burned, which again reminds me of the Polish customs around. And I'm going to say the name wrong. I always said it was Marzana, but I was told no, that's not how it's, like Mariana or something. It's another way of pronouncing it, and I don't quite remember. I know Joanna has corrected me on that, and so have some other people. But in any case, the tradition of burning those effigies like at the beginning of spring. So we're definitely seeing this representation of winter, and there seems to be this understanding of nature as being both providing bounty and also potentially taking something away. Although it also occurs to me with the winter association, if we think about coal, about giving bad children coal, if we think about coal as being the offering of the dark side of the feminine, it may not necessarily be a negative offering. If you're cold, I mean, coal is something you typically burn to, to have warmth, right? So that may be associated more with her wintry aspect. Now, in Italy, I don't know how cold it really gets in the Mediterranean regions in wintertime. I mean, I don't know climatologically how cold it gets, because I think we often tend to assume where we are in the United States or in Europe or in places like that winter is cold, right? But that isn't necessarily so. In some places, winter may be seasonable or mild or not terribly cold. So I don't know. It's very interesting. But I just wanted to finish up with a couple of things here. Okay, so looking back at the Santa Claus book, there's a last paragraph here. It says, in our glance, and this was from their whole chapter, at recent European gift givers, we see that all the non-saint male figures are variations of a theme. They are black and hairy, part beast, usually goat, associated with elves or goblins. They carry bells, whips, sticks, apples, ashes, and nuts. They carry bags or are humpbacked, and they bring both terror and gifts to humanity. The women, who are gift givers, hags and witches, are seen upon closer look to be beneficent but dangerous fertility goddesses. Fortunately for misbehaving children, who were threatened with some pretty gruesome punishments throughout Europe, both the wild man and the earth goddess softened to become gift givers. So, very interesting, because then you could look at if Santa Claus, because I believe that's her thesis here, is that Santa Claus was originally one of these wild man kind of figures. And again, there's similar message that nature can provide for you. It can be a source of a gift-giving source. Can be something that provides a bounty or it rewards us in some way with something that is either pleasant or pleasurable, but it can also be something that can punish as well or be punishing. We don't really exist separate from our environment. We're part of it, and we're a product of it, and we exist within it. You can't. I think that's what I was listening to with Alan Watts. He said, if you're talking about void nothingness, it exists with respect to form. And he was talking about how if you have a battery and you have a positive and negative charge, he said it's not like the charge is sitting there like just waiting to be activated. It does not activate until you have both halves. So this idea that we can separate the positive and the negative, or the masculine and the feminine, that we can separate those two things and say that one is in a kind of neutral state as the others. He said that's not how it works. They work when they work in concert together. That's when they work, and that's when they provide something. So if we think of the masculine as providing the structure and manifestation, whereas the feminine is that void of possibility. Here we're looking at nature as this void of possibility that can manifest in different ways, depending on the form that the masculine takes, right? Kind of interesting way to think about it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for listening to Chthonia throughout 2024. And I did post the 2025 list on Instagram and also to my Patreon subscribers. It should also be on Facebook as well. You can find me on social media at Chthonia Podcast, one word on Instagram, And it's at Chthonia Podcast, one word, on YouTube. Facebook, it's Chthonia Podcast, 2 words. I do have a Patreon, as I mentioned earlier on, patreon.com/Chthonia, if you would be interested in supporting my work. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much for listening or watching. And I hope all of you have today is the winter solstice when I'm recording this, so I hope you have a happy solstice. Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa, Saturnalia, Hanukkah, whatever you're celebrating at this time of year. And of course, a very happy new year. And I will see you again in 2025.